The monster's arrival. The outpost was quiet, almost too quiet. Located on the edge of the known galaxy, it was a small settlement where people lived simple lives. Engineers repaired machines, miners dug for valuable minerals, and scientists studied the strange planet's environment. Life moved slowly here, predictable and dull. Until that night. It started with a low hum, barely noticeable at first. The power flickered, lights dimmed, and machinery stopped working. People looked up from their workstations, confused. Then the alarms blared, a loud, sharp sound that echoed across the outpost. Something had breached the perimeter. "Code Red," shouted Commander Harlan over the intercom. "Everyone, get inside and lock your doors." Panic spread like wildfire. Workers dropped their tools and ran toward their quarters. Mothers grabbed their children and rushed indoors. In the midst of the chaos, a young maintenance worker named Eli stayed frozen, staring at the screens in the control room. Eli was an ordinary man, with no special skills or rank. His job was to fix broken pipes and replace old circuits. But tonight, something felt different. Something about the breach didn't seem right. He turned to the security feed. The cameras showed the outer gates, now bent and broken as if something massive had forced its way through. And then he saw it. The creature was enormous, taller than any human, with a hulking body covered in jagged dark scales. Its glowing red eyes pierced through the darkness. Long, sharp claws scraped against the metal floor as it moved. It roared, a deep, bone-shaking sound that made Eli's heart race. "It's a monster," whispered one of the guards standing near him. "It's going to kill us all." The creature stepped forward, its heavy footsteps thudding against the ground. The few guards brave enough to stand their ground opened fire. Bullets ricocheted off the creature's tough hide, barely scratching it. It roared again, louder this time, and the guards fled in terror. But Eli noticed something strange. The creature wasn't chasing them. It wasn't attacking. It just stood there, scanning the area. Its glowing eyes darted around, almost as if it was searching for something or someone. Eli's fingers hovered over the controls. He could activate the emergency containment system, trapping the creature in an electric barrier. But something stopped him. The creature didn't look like it was here to destroy. It looked hesitant, almost scared. "Get out of there." Commander Harlan's voice barked through the intercom. "Everyone, retreat to the inner levels. We'll deal with this thing later." The guards and workers obeyed, rushing to safety. Eli, however, lingered. He couldn't take his eyes off the screen. The creature moved cautiously now, stepping over debris and broken machinery. It let out a low, mournful sound, almost like a whimper. "What are you doing, Eli?" A voice called from behind him. It was Marla, a fellow worker. She grabbed his arm. "Come on, we have to go." Eli shook his head. "Wait, look at it." Marla glanced at the screen, her eyes widening in fear. "It's a monster, Eli. Don't be stupid. It's going to kill us." "Then why hasn't it?" he asked quietly. Marla didn't have an answer. She pulled him again, harder this time, and Eli finally followed her. They locked the doors behind them, joining the others in the safe zone. For hours, the outpost remained on high alert. No one slept. The guards monitored the creature's movements, reporting every step it took. But it never attacked again. Instead, it lingered near a damaged structure on the outskirts of the settlement. Commander Harlan paced back and forth in the control room. "We have to take it down," he growled. "It's only a matter of time before it starts tearing this place apart." "But why hasn't it already?" Eli blurted out before he could stop himself. Everyone turned to look at him. The commander's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" Eli hesitated but then stood his ground. "I mean, if it wanted to kill us, it could have done it already. It's strong enough to break through our gates and survive gunfire. So why hasn't it?" The room fell silent. No one had an answer. Finally, the commander shook his head. "That's not your concern, Eli. Your job is to stay alive and stay out of the way." But Eli couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the creature than met the eye. Back in his cramped quarters, Eli sat on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed the scene over and over. The creature's hesitation, its mournful sound, the way it avoided attacking anyone directly. It didn't feel like the actions of a mindless monster. It felt deliberate. Outside, the creature stood alone in the dark, its glowing eyes fixed on the damaged structure. The outpost's floodlights flickered, casting eerie shadows across its massive form. For a moment, it looked up toward the cameras, as if it knew it was being watched. Eli couldn't help but wonder, what was it searching for? And why did it feel more afraid of them than they were of it? Little did Eli know, this was only the beginning. A lone observer, the outpost settled into an uneasy silence after the chaotic night. Workers whispered about the monster, their stories growing more exaggerated with each retelling. Some claimed it had claws as long as their arms. Others swore it could breathe fire. Fear spread like a virus, and no one dared venture beyond the inner gates. Except for Eli. While others were content to stay locked indoors, Eli couldn't shake the image of the creature hesitating at the gates. It wasn't just a monster. It had acted with purpose, almost like it was searching for something. And that small detail gnawed at him. The security room was empty when Eli slipped inside. The guards had set the cameras to loop, assuming the creature wouldn't return during daylight. Eli rewound the footage from the previous night, his hands trembling slightly as he clicked through the timeline. The grainy footage showed the creature again, standing near the damaged structure at the edge of the outpost. It didn't roar or thrash about. Instead, it crouched low, its massive frame huddled over something on the ground. "What are you hiding?" Eli muttered under his breath, leaning closer to the screen. He hit pause. The camera angle wasn't great, but he could just make out the faint outline of something smaller, much smaller, lying beneath the creature. It wasn't debris or equipment. It looked alive. Eli's heart raced. Was it protecting something? Another of its kind. A child. The idea seemed impossible, but it fit with what he had seen. The creature had attacked only when it felt threatened, and even then, it hadn't gone for the kill. "You shouldn't be here," a voice startled him. Eli spun around to see Marla standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. She had the sharp eyes of someone who had seen too much in her life, but they softened slightly when she looked at Eli. "I could say the same to you," Eli replied, trying to sound casual. Marla stepped closer, glancing at the paused footage. Her expression darkened. "You're still on about this thing." "It's a monster, Eli. Whatever it's doing out there doesn't matter. The commander will deal with it." "How can you be so sure it's a monster?" Eli shot back. "What if it's something else? What if we're wrong?" Marla shook her head. "Don't romanticize it. Things like that don't think like us. They don't feel like us. You're going to get yourself killed." Eli looked back at the screen. "Maybe. But what if I'm right?" That night, while the outpost slept, Eli made his decision. Armed with nothing more than a flashlight, a toolkit, and a pack of emergency rations, he slipped out of his quarters. The air outside was cold and still, the kind of silence that made every step sound deafening. The damaged structure loomed ahead, half collapsed from years of neglect. It had been part of an old mining station, abandoned when the outpost expanded. Now, it was a shadowy ruin that even the guards avoided. Eli's footsteps crunched softly against the dirt as he approached. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, his heart pounding in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but curiosity, and something deeper, kept him moving forward. The creature appeared suddenly, stepping out of the shadows like a ghost. Its towering frame blocked the faint moonlight, casting an enormous shadow over Eli. It growled low in its throat, a warning sound that vibrated through the air. Eli froze, his hands trembling as he raised the flashlight. The beam caught the creature's face, its sharp features, glowing eyes, and scarred hide. But those eyes, they weren't filled with rage. They held something else: fear, pain, desperation. "I'm not here to hurt you," Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't sure if the creature could understand him. But he spoke anyway. I want to help." The creature growled again, stepping closer. Eli resisted the urge to run. His legs felt like lead, but he forced himself to stand still. Slowly, he reached into his bag and pulled out the rations. He unwrapped one of the protein bars and held it out. For a moment, the creature didn't move. Then, cautiously, it reached out with a clawed hand. Eli flinched but held his ground. The creature snatched the bar, retreating a few steps before sniffing it. It made a strange clicking sound before devouring the food in one bite. Eli let out a shaky breath. Okay, progress. But then he saw it. Behind the creature, partially hidden in the rubble, was a smaller figure. It was curled up, its body trembling weakly. It looked similar to the larger creature, but its scales were softer, its frame thinner. It was injured, its leg bent at an unnatural angle. The larger creature moved protectively in front of the smaller one, growling again. Eli raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I see now," he said softly. "You're not a monster. You're a parent." The creature tilted its head slightly, as if it understood. Eli's heart broke as he looked at the injured youngling. He knew the outpost wouldn't help them. If anything, they would see this as more reason to attack. But Eli couldn't walk away. Not now. "I'll help you," he whispered, more to himself than to the creature. "No matter what it takes." The creature watched him carefully, its glowing eyes filled with something that looked almost like trust. For the first time, Eli felt a strange sense of connection, a fragile bond between two beings from different worlds. And so, as the night deepened and the outpost remained unaware, Eli began his quiet mission: to save the monster and its child. Contact. The outpost's strict protocols left little room for wandering thoughts, but Eli couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. Every detail of that night burned into his mind. The larger creature's hesitation, the smaller one's trembling body, and the unspoken understanding that had passed between them. While the others called it a monster, Eli saw something more, something he couldn't ignore. The next day, Eli worked his usual shift, repairing broken panels and replacing filters in the outpost's air system. But his thoughts were elsewhere. He had made a decision. He had to go back, not just to observe this time, but to act. The opportunity came late in the evening when most of the outpost had settled into their routines. The guards were focused on monitoring the perimeter, their attention distracted by false alarms triggered by the planet's erratic weather. Eli used the chaos as cover, slipping out of the main compound with a small pack slung over his shoulder. The ruins were eerily quiet as he approached, his footsteps crunching softly against the loose gravel. The same oppressive silence hung over the area, broken only by the occasional creak of the old metal structure in the wind. Eli's flashlight cast long, jagged shadows as he moved, every sound amplified in the stillness. He stopped at the edge of the structure and listened. At first, there was nothing. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic clicking, like a whispered language carried on the wind. It was the same sound the creature had made the night before. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was softer, almost comforting. Eli crept closer, weaving through the rubble until he reached the same spot where he had first seen them. His heart pounded as he crouched behind a half-collapsed wall and peered through a gap. The larger creature was there, its massive frame hunched over the smaller one. It was grooming the youngling with careful, deliberate movements, using its claws to gently clean dirt and debris from the smaller creature's scales. The youngling whimpered softly, its injured leg still twisted unnaturally. But it didn't resist. The scene was almost tender, and Eli found himself holding his breath. Then the larger creature turned its head sharply, its glowing eyes locked onto Eli's hiding spot. Eli froze. He knew there was no point in running. The creature was faster, stronger, and far more at home in this terrain than he was. Instead, he stepped out into the open, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through his veins. "I just want to help." The creature growled low in its throat, its body tensing. It moved to shield the youngling, its massive frame blocking Eli's view. Eli stayed still, making no sudden movements. Slowly, he crouched and placed his pack on the ground, opening it to show the supplies he had brought. Inside were medical tools, a portable heater, and more protein bars. He pulled one out, unwrapped it, and held it up. The larger creature tilted its head, watching him with cautious eyes. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it stepped forward. Eli's breath caught as the creature came closer. Its sheer size was overwhelming, every detail of its rough, scarred hide now visible in the dim light. It stopped a few feet away, its growl fading into a deep, guttural rumble. Eli placed the protein bar on the ground and backed away slowly. The creature sniffed the bar before picking it up with surprising delicacy. It ate quickly, then turned its attention back to Eli. There was no growl this time, only silence. "I want to help the little one," Eli said, pointing gently toward the youngling. "Its leg. It's broken, isn't it?" The creature didn't respond, but its body language shifted slightly. It no longer seemed as threatening. Instead, it looked tired, wary. Eli took that as permission to move closer. As he approached, the youngling whimpered and tried to pull away, but its injury prevented it from moving far. Eli knelt a few feet away, carefully setting down his tools. The larger creature hovered nearby, watching every move he made. "It's okay," Eli murmured softly, his tone as calming as he could make it. He retrieved a splint and some gauze from his pack, showing them to the creature before beginning his work. The youngling flinched as Eli touched its leg, but he worked quickly and gently, straightening the limb and securing it with the splint. The larger creature growled softly, its body tensing, but it didn't intervene. When Eli was finished, he stepped back and sat on the ground, giving them space. "There," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "That should help." The larger creature approached the youngling, sniffing the splint cautiously. It clicked softly, a sound that seemed to soothe the smaller one. Then it turned its gaze to Eli. For a moment, the two of them just stared at each other. Eli couldn't explain it, but he felt a strange connection in that moment. A fragile understanding between two beings who couldn't speak the same language. The creature let out a low, rumbling sound, not quite a growl but not entirely unfriendly either. Then it backed away, nudging the youngling to follow. The smaller creature limped slightly but moved more easily now, the splint keeping its leg steady. Eli watched them disappear into the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. They weren't monsters. They were something far more complex, far more alive. And for the first time, he felt a spark of hope. The bond. The next few days passed in a tense blur at the outpost. The guards tightened security, reinforcing the perimeter with motion detectors and drone patrols. The official stance was clear. The creature was a threat that needed to be eliminated. Commander Harlan made frequent announcements, rallying the outpost's workers to stand united against the alien menace. But Eli's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about the creatures, about their intelligence, their resilience, and their quiet trust in him. The larger one had protected its young at every turn, and though it could have torn him apart, it had let him help. That wasn't the behavior of a mindless predator. It was something else entirely. Late one night, unable to sleep, Eli crept back to the ruins. This time, he brought more supplies, a small medical kit, water, and a rudimentary translator device scavenged from the science lab. It was old and glitchy, but it might help bridge the gap between them. The ruins were quieter than before, the cold wind sweeping through the broken metal beams. Eli shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around him. He stepped carefully over the rubble, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Then he heard it, the soft clicking sound he had come to recognize. He followed the noise to a sheltered corner of the structure, where the larger creature was crouched protectively around its young. The youngling's leg was still splinted, but it seemed to be healing. It no longer whimpered, and its eyes, large and reflective, watched Eli with cautious curiosity. Eli crouched a few feet away, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He set the supplies on the ground and gestured toward them. "Food," he said softly, holding up a protein bar. "Water. Medicine." The larger creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. Eli placed the items on the ground and backed away, giving them space. The creature sniffed the supplies, then clicked softly to the youngling. The smaller one hesitated before limping forward, its movements still stiff but improving. It sniffed the protein bar before grabbing it with tiny, clawed hands. Eli couldn't help but smile. "You're brave," he murmured. "Just like your parent." The larger creature growled softly, its gaze fixed on him. Eli raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I know you don't trust me yet, but I'm not your enemy." He pulled out the translator device, holding it up for the creature to see. "This might help us understand each other." The creature growled again, but it didn't move to attack. Eli placed the device on the ground and activated it. The small screen flickered to life, emitting a faint hum. "Can you speak?" Eli asked tentatively. The creature stared at him, unmoving. Then, to Eli's astonishment, it clicked softly, a series of short, deliberate sounds. The translator struggled to process the input, emitting garbled static before finally spitting out a crude translation. "Protect. Child. Danger." Eli's eyes widened. It was basic, almost broken, but it was communication. "You're protecting your child," he said slowly, pointing to the youngling. "From us." The creature didn't respond directly, but its body language said enough. It huffed, its massive shoulders rising and falling as it let out a low, mournful sound. The translator struggled again, then produced a single word. "Fear." Eli's heart sank. "You're afraid of us," he said softly. "Because we hurt you, didn't we?" The creature growled low, a sound that vibrated through the air. It wasn't a threat. It was frustration. Pain. Eli sat back on his heels, his mind racing. If the translator was right, then the creature wasn't here to attack. It was here to survive, to protect its young from the humans who had disrupted its home. "I didn't know," Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know we hurt you. I'm sorry." The creature watched him for a long moment. Then, slowly, it clicked again. The translator processed the sounds, struggling to keep up. "Harm. Unintentional. Protect. Now." Eli nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll help you," he said. "I'll protect you both. But you have to trust me." The larger creature didn't respond immediately. Instead, it clicked softly to the youngling, which chirped back in a high-pitched tone. The two seemed to be communicating, their sounds too complex for the translator to follow. Finally, the larger creature turned back to Eli and took a step closer. Eli held his breath as the massive being crouched in front of him, its glowing eyes locking onto his. For a moment, he felt the sheer weight of its presence, the strength, the intelligence, and the deep, unrelenting fear it carried. Then, to his surprise, it reached out with one massive claw and gently touched the translator. A soft click followed, and the translator beeped. "Trust. Fragile. Do not break." Eli nodded, his throat tight. "I won't." Over the next few nights, Eli returned to the ruins, bringing more supplies and learning more about the creatures. The larger one had a name. Though the translator couldn't render it into human words, Eli began calling it Vren. The youngling, smaller and more curious, seemed to warm to him quickly, often chirping in response to his words. Through their interactions, Eli pieced together fragments of their story. Vren and its youngling were the last of their kind on this planet. Their home had been destroyed by the outpost's mining operations, forcing them to flee. They had come to the ruins seeking shelter, but the outpost's guards had attacked them on sight, leaving the youngling injured. Eli's guilt grew with each passing day. Humanity had labeled them monsters, but the real monsters were the ones who had driven them to this desperate situation. And now, with the outpost planning to hunt them down, Vren and its youngling had little chance of survival. But Eli wasn't going to let that happen. "We'll figure this out," he promised one night, sitting cross-legged in front of Vren. The larger creature watched him with wary eyes, but there was something else there too. A glimmer of hope. As the night stretched on, Eli began to realize the truth. The bond they had formed wasn't just fragile, it was life-changing. For both of them. And he would protect it, no matter the cost. The turning point. The calm at the outpost was deceptive. The air was thick with tension as guards patrolled the perimeter with heavy weapons, their eyes scanning for any sign of the monster. Commander Harlan's voice echoed through the intercom system every few hours, reminding everyone to stay vigilant. "We will not let this threat go unchecked," he announced, his tone sharp and commanding. "The safety of this outpost is our top priority. We strike at dawn." Eli listened from the shadows of the maintenance bay, his heart pounding. Dawn. That gave him less than 12 hours. He had spent the last few nights forming a bond with Vren and the youngling, learning their story and witnessing their intelligence. But time was running out. The outpost's leaders had no interest in understanding. They only saw a threat that needed to be eliminated. Eli knew he couldn't convince the outpost to stop the hunt. Commander Harlan was too set in his ways, and the guards followed orders without question. If Vren and the youngling were going to survive, Eli had to act now. A desperate plan. Eli paced his small quarters, going over his plan for the 100th time. He had managed to smuggle out basic supplies, medical kits, a portable power cell, and a heat generator, but it wasn't enough. Vren and the youngling couldn't stay hidden forever. They needed a way off the planet. Eli's fingers hovered over his tablet, pulling up schematics for the old mining transports stored in the hangar. Most were decommissioned, their systems barely functional, but one could still fly with enough repairs. It was risky, but it was their only chance. He gathered his tools and headed to the hangar under the cover of darkness. The guards were focused on the perimeter, leaving the interior mostly unmonitored. Eli slipped through the maintenance access tunnel, his heart pounding with every step. The transport loomed in the dimly lit hangar, a massive rusted machine that hadn't been flown in years. Eli climbed aboard and began his work, his hands moving with practiced precision. He rewired the power core, bypassed the outdated systems, and ran a quick diagnostic. The engines coughed and sputtered, but eventually roared to life. "Good enough," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. The discovery. Eli's work was interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing through the hangar. He froze, his heart racing. A flashlight beam swept across the transport, stopping just short of his hiding spot. "Eli," the voice called. It was Marla. He stepped out from behind the console, his face pale. "Marla, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You've been sneaking around for days, and now you're tampering with a transport. What's going on?" Eli hesitated. He trusted Marla more than most, but this wasn't something she could know. Not yet. "I'm fixing it, just in case we need it for an emergency." Marla crossed her arms, her sharp gaze pinning him in place. "Don't lie to me, Eli. You're not doing this for the outpost." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." Eli glanced at the transport, then back at Marla. She had always been blunt, but she wasn't cruel. If anyone might understand, it was her. "There's something I need to protect," he said finally. "Something the outpost wants to destroy." Marla's expression softened slightly. "The creature," she said, her voice low. "You've been helping it." Eli's stomach dropped. "How do you know?" "I'm not blind," she said, stepping closer. "And I've been watching you. I don't know why you're risking everything for that thing, but I want to understand. Eli took a deep breath and told her everything. The bond he had formed with Vren and the youngling, their story, and the truth about the outpost's role in their suffering. By the time he finished, Marla's face was a mix of disbelief and sadness. "You're serious," she said. "They're intelligent. More than we ever gave them credit for," Eli said. "And they're just trying to survive." Marla was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, I'll help you." The race against time. With Marla's help, Eli moved quickly. She had access to restricted areas and managed to disable some of the surveillance systems without raising suspicion. Together, they loaded the transport with supplies and prepped it for takeoff. As dawn approached, the tension in the outpost grew. Guards assembled near the perimeter, ready to launch an assault. Commander Harlan stood at the forefront, barking orders and finalizing plans. Eli and Marla worked in near silence, their urgency fueled by the knowledge that time was running out. Finally, everything was ready. The transport was functional, the supplies were secured, and the escape route was mapped. "Now we just have to get them here," Eli said, glancing at the ruins in the distance. Marla nodded. "Let's move." The showdown. Eli and Marla made their way to the ruins under the cover of early dawn. The guards were distracted, their attention focused on the upcoming assault. When they reached the ruins, Vren and the youngling were already waiting, their glowing eyes watching the humans approach. "We're here to take you somewhere safe," Eli said softly, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. Vren growled low, but it wasn't hostile. It was cautious, wary of betrayal. The youngling chirped softly, limping forward on its splinted leg. Marla stepped forward, holding out a water canister. "We're not your enemies," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "We just want to help." Vren hesitated, then clicked softly, a sound that Eli had come to recognize as agreement. Together, they led the creatures back to the transport, moving quickly through the shadows. But as they reached the hangar, alarms blared across the outpost. "They found us," Marla said, her face pale. Eli's heart pounded. "We're not leaving without them." The transport roared to life as the first wave of guards arrived, their weapons raised. Vren stepped in front of Eli and Marla, its massive frame shielding them from the incoming fire. "Stop," Eli shouted. "They're not a threat." The guards hesitated, their weapons trembling in their hands. But Commander Harlan's voice crackled through the comms. "Fire on my command." Eli turned to Vren. "You have to go. Now." Vren clicked softly, then nudged the youngling toward the transport. Marla pulled Eli aboard as the engines roared, and the transport lifted off just as the guards opened fire. Eli watched from the cockpit as the outpost grew smaller in the distance. Vren sat silently beside the youngling, its glowing eyes fixed on the horizon. For the first time in weeks, Eli allowed himself to hope. Sacrifice and redemption. The transport soared through the atmosphere, its engines straining under the weight of age and disrepair. Eli sat in the cockpit, his hands gripping the controls tightly. His heart pounded as he glanced at the radar, a cluster of blips moving fast. The outpost's drones were in pursuit. "How long do we have?" Marla asked from the co-pilot's seat, her voice tense. "Minutes," Eli replied. "Maybe less." Behind them, in the cramped cargo hold, Vren crouched protectively around the youngling. The larger creature growled softly, its glowing eyes fixed on the sealed hatch as if it could sense the danger closing in. The youngling chirped weakly, its injured leg tucked beneath its body. Eli swallowed hard. This wasn't how he had imagined their escape. He had hoped for a clean getaway, a chance to take Vren and the youngling to a safer location without drawing attention. But the alarms, the drones, and the outpost's relentless determination to destroy them had shattered that hope. "Can we outrun them?" Marla asked, her hands flying across the controls as she adjusted the transport's trajectory. "Not in this old thing," Eli admitted. "We're barely holding together as it is." The transport jolted as something exploded nearby. A warning alarm blared, and Eli's stomach lurched. "They're firing on us," Marla shouted. Eli gritted his teeth and pulled the transport into a sharp climb, narrowly avoiding another missile. The drones were relentless, their sleek, metallic bodies glinting in the sunlight as they closed in. A dangerous gamble. In the cargo hold, Vren growled louder, its claws scraping against the metal floor. Eli turned in his seat to face the creature. "I need you to trust me," he said, his voice firm despite the chaos. "We're going to get you out of this, but I need you to stay calm." Vren's glowing eyes locked onto Eli's, and for a moment, there was an understanding, a fragile bond forged through desperation and trust. Vren clicked softly, nudging the youngling closer to Eli, as if acknowledging his promise. Marla's voice cut through the moment. "We can't keep this up. The drones are too fast, and the transport's shielding won't hold much longer." Eli's mind raced. He scanned the radar, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a canyon below. A deep, jagged scar in the planet's surface. "If we can make it to the canyon, we might be able to lose them," he said. Marla frowned. "That's a tight maneuver in a ship this old." "It's our only shot," Eli said, pushing the transport into a steep dive. The transport hurtled toward the canyon, the ground rushing up to meet them. Eli's hands shook as he adjusted the controls, guiding the ship into the narrow gorge. The walls of the canyon rose around them, the transport's engine screaming in protest as it twisted and turned through the tight passage. The drones followed, their sleek forms darting effortlessly through the canyon. One of them fired, and the transport rocked violently as a missile grazed its hull. "We're not going to make it," Marla shouted. "We will," Eli said through gritted teeth. "We have to." A final stand. As the transport careened through the canyon, Vren let out a deep guttural growl. Eli glanced back and saw the creature standing, its massive frame hunched to avoid the low ceiling. It clicked rapidly, its sounds frantic and urgent. "What is it saying?" Marla asked, her voice tight with fear. Eli grabbed the translator and held it up. The device crackled to life, struggling to process Vren's clicks. Finally, it produced a single chilling word: "Protect." Before Eli could react, Vren moved toward the hatch. It placed a clawed hand on the release mechanism, its glowing eyes meeting Eli's one last time. "No," Eli shouted, his voice breaking. "You don't have to do this." Vren clicked again, and the translator crackled. "Save, young." With a deafening roar, Vren slammed the hatch open. Wind and debris whipped through the cargo hold as the creature leaped into the open sky, landing on the nearest drone. Its massive claws tore through the sleek metal, sending sparks flying. The drones shifted their focus immediately, their weapons trained on Vren. The creature roared again, drawing the enemy fire away from the transport. Eli's hands trembled as he pulled the transport out of the canyon. The youngling chirped frantically, its small body trembling as it watched its protector disappear into the chaos. Marla's voice was barely audible over the alarms. "Eli, it's sacrificing itself." Eli clenched his jaw, tears stinging his eyes. "I know. Escape and loss." The transport broke free of the canyon, its engines sputtering but holding. The drones didn't follow. They were too focused on Vren, the creature's powerful form a distraction they couldn't ignore. Eli guided the transport into the upper atmosphere, his heart heavy. The youngling chirped softly, its sounds mournful and confused. Eli turned to face it, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I couldn't stop it." The youngling tilted its head, its large, reflective eyes locking onto Eli. It clicked softly, a sound that the translator processed into a single, heartbreaking word: "Parent." Eli swallowed hard, his hands gripping the controls so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't know where they were going now, only that they had to keep moving. Vren's sacrifice had bought them a chance, just a chance, and Eli wasn't going to waste it. Marla placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression a mix of sadness and determination. "We have to make this count," she said. "For Vren. For the youngling." Eli nodded, his jaw set. "We will." As the transport disappeared into the stars, the planet below faded into the distance, and though Eli knew the fight wasn't over, he carried with him the weight of Vren's sacrifice and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a place where the youngling could live in peace. But deep in his heart, he knew one thing for certain: the outpost's leaders wouldn't let this go. Not without a fight. The next battle was already on the horizon. Humanity's choice. The transport drifted silently through the void, its battered hull illuminated by the faint glow of distant stars. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with loss. Eli sat slumped in the cockpit, staring blankly at the radar. Marla sat beside him, occasionally glancing back at the youngling in the cargo hold. The small creature chirped weakly, its mournful sounds echoing through the cramped space. "We need a plan," Marla said finally, breaking the silence. "We can't keep running forever." Eli nodded but didn't respond immediately. His mind was still replaying the moment Vren had sacrificed itself to save them. The raw bravery, the selflessness, it haunted him. He knew they had to make Vren's sacrifice mean something. But how? "The mining colony," Eli said after a long pause. "There's an old relay station there, abandoned when the outpost expanded. If we can reach it, we can send a message to the wider network." Marla frowned. "A message? To who?" "To everyone," Eli said, his voice gaining strength. "The outpost can't hide what's happened. If we show the galaxy what they did to Vren's kind, maybe someone will listen." Marla hesitated. "That's a big gamble. What if no one cares? Or worse, what if they come after us instead?" Eli turned to her, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "Then we'll face that when it comes. But I'm not letting Vren's story die with us." The journey to the relay station. The relay station was located on the far side of the planet, deep within a dense asteroid belt. The journey was treacherous, the transport's worn engines struggling to navigate the tight spaces between tumbling rocks. Marla manned the controls, her sharp reflexes keeping them one step ahead of disaster. Eli spent the journey tending to the youngling. Its injury was healing, but its spirit seemed broken. It hardly chirped anymore, its reflective eyes dull and distant. Eli sat beside it, his voice soft. "We're almost there," he said. "You're going to be okay. I promise." The youngling tilted its head slightly, its small body trembling. Eli reached out carefully, placing a hand on its smooth, scaled back. The youngling didn't pull away. Marla's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're coming up on the station. Looks intact, but I'm not seeing any power readings." Eli stood and moved to the cockpit. The station loomed ahead, a massive skeletal structure silhouetted against the distant sun. It was old, its metal beams rusted and twisted, but it still stood, a relic of humanity's first efforts to colonize this planet. "We'll make it work," Eli said. "We have to." Activating the station. The station was dark and eerily quiet. Eli and Marla worked quickly, dragging power cells from the transport and connecting them to the relay's control hub. The system sputtered to life, its ancient screens flickering with static. "Can you get it online?" Marla asked, glancing nervously at the radar. They were exposed out here, and it was only a matter of time before the outpost realized where they had gone. "Working on it," Eli said, his fingers flying across the controls. The interface was clunky and outdated, but he managed to access the main communication array. "Got it. Signal is weak, but it'll do." He turned to Marla. "Help me set up the feed. We're going to show them everything. Vren, the youngling, the mining operations, all of it." Marla nodded, grabbing a portable recorder from the transport. Together, they began assembling the broadcast. The feed went live after an hour of frantic preparation. Eli stood in front of the camera, his face lit by the faint glow of the station's monitors. Behind him, the youngling sat quietly, its injured leg still bandaged. "My name is Eli Calder," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I'm a maintenance worker at Outpost 47, a remote colony on the edge of the galaxy. What I'm about to show you will change how you see this planet, and maybe how you see humanity." He paused, taking a deep breath. For years, the outpost has been mining this planet's resources, destroying ecosystems and displacing native species. Recently, we encountered one of those species, a being we called a monster. But it wasn't a monster. It was intelligent. It was a parent, trying to protect its young from us. Eli gestured to the youngling, which chirped softly, its reflective eyes glinting in the dim light. "This is all that's left of them. The rest were killed by the outpost's operations. When the parent tried to defend its child, it was hunted, attacked, and ultimately sacrificed itself to save us." The screen behind Eli flickered, showing footage of Vren and the youngling in the ruins. The translator's crude recordings played, translating Vren's clicks into simple, heartbreaking words. "Protect. Fear. Save young." Eli's voice grew firmer. "This isn't just about them. It's about us. About what we've become. If we keep treating the universe as something to conquer, we'll destroy more than just planets. We'll destroy ourselves." The broadcast ended with a simple plea. "Help us protect what's left. Help us show that humanity is capable of more." The response. The outpost's leaders responded swiftly. Within hours, patrol ships were dispatched to the relay station, their orders clear: capture or eliminate Eli and the youngling before the message spread too far. But it was already too late. Eli's broadcast had reached deep into the galactic network, spreading faster than the outpost's efforts to contain it. On distant planets, people watched in stunned silence as the story unfolded. Activists, scientists, and ordinary citizens began to speak out, demanding accountability. As the patrol ships closed in, Eli and Marla prepared for the worst. The youngling chirped anxiously, sensing the tension in the air. Marla gripped Eli's arm, her expression grim. "Do you think anyone will come?" she asked. Eli looked out at the stars, his jaw set. "I don't know, but I had to try." The unexpected arrival. Just as the patrol ships entered firing range, another signal appeared on the radar. A massive ship dropped out of hyperspace, its sleek design unlike anything Eli or Marla had ever seen. It hovered between the station and the patrol ships, its presence both imposing and protective. A voice crackled through the comms, speaking in an unfamiliar language. Moments later, the translator interpreted, "We received your message. Stand down. This is not humanity's choice alone." Eli's eyes widened as he realized the truth. Someone had listened. Someone had come. Humanity wasn't alone anymore, and neither were Vren's kind. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, hope burned bright in the darkness.